is Everyday Expertise, and I'm Angela, and I'm here today with Stephen Jack Cullen. They are a folklorist, storyteller, and the creator behind the YouTube channel Hog and Dice. Hello!
Hello.
So, my first question is, what is the origin of the name Hog and Dice?
Well, for a while, I lived in an apartment in Dublin. It was while I was still doing my college degree. We had a lot of people over to play tabletop games, and we cooked an awful lot of roast pork. So we decided to call it the Hog and Dice.
Well, that makes sense, yeah. That must have been an interesting D&D group.
Yeah, we had a lot of different campaigns going on with a lot of different groups all at once. Sometimes an awful lot of one shots played in the one day.
So, how did you get started with Irish folklore and storytelling?
With Irish folklore in particular, it was in college. Like I had the same kind of background everyone growing up in Ireland would, learning some of the very well known stories like the Children of Lear and that kind of thing. But when I was in college, I changed major a lot. Um, Ended up doing a couple of modules in Irish folklore and loved it. So I made that my major, and yeah, that was how I got into it properly.
And then so actually the storytelling and stuff. How did you get started with that?
Storytelling, I I've always been involved in acting since I was about 3 years old.
Mhm.
I started going to a kind of storyteller gathering in Dublin called Dublin Yarn Spinners,
Mhm.
and I went to that. That really helped me get into the storytelling aspect, but also one of my lecturers, the late Dahi O'Hogan, he recommended that all of us visit a place that was just opening. This was back in 2010, called the Leprechaun Museum, which is in Dublin,
Mhm.
and he had helped put together their tour. And it turned out it was a storytelling museum. I visited there a few times and really, really loved everything they were doing. And now I work there.
Mhm. Yeah. Actually, I saw that on your website. I was wondering what. So then, what does the National Leprechaun Museum do? They.
What we do is we have a bunch of themed rooms that are set up to reflect different aspects of Irish folklore.
Hmm.
And your tour guide is a storyteller who brings you through explaining some of the concepts and telling some of the stories.
Mhm. Well, that's cool. I think that's actually an interesting approach to having a museum. You know, because museums can seem kind of dry when you're just walking through them.
Mm. It's a very theatrical experience. I like to joke that we're actually the exhibits ourselves, not really the tour guides.
So, why did you decide to start a YouTube channel?
Um, there was a few reasons. When I was studying folklore, one of the things I learned about was that the Irish Folklore Commission and them, the work they put into preserving and collecting the folklore, that whatever they could from around the country. And they said they didn't get all of it, and that some of it would be lost forever. And so in my, like, for me, I just don't want that happening anymore. So I decided a good way to prevent that was just to make sure that there's somewhere that has as much of it as possible, and that a YouTube channel makes that very accessible. Like the more heads it's in, the longer it will live.
Mm, no, it's true. And once it's on the internet, it's there forever.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about you're a storyteller guide for the museum.
Mhm.
You've done writing. You do LARP. How do you feel that all of your interests sort of intersect with your work in preserving Irish folklore?
That's an interesting one. In terms of, we'll start with the writing.
Mm,
There's a kind of depressing lack of speculative fiction coming out of
mm,
Ireland.
mm,
Uh, Even though we've got the perfect mythology for it. Um, and fiction is one of the ways in which you keep folklore going and you keep
mm,
mythology going. And everything I write has some aspect of it in it. Like there's one book I have available at the moment, The Practitioner's Guide to Dublin, which is only about, I'd say, less than a third stuff I've made up myself, and the rest of it is just folklore and myth and history that's been slanted a little bit.
hmm.
Um, Whereas with LARP and role play and things like that, I'm not able to do a character that's not at least partly based on it. I completely lost that ability a long time ago.
Well, no, that's great. I think it's great that you can be inspired by the past, by the great
Hmm.
sort of myth makers, you could say, of your ancestry. Yeah.
There was actually one LARP I attended a few years ago where it was one of the wizard school ones, and I was usually able to cast a spell before other people because I had a language to draw on. I
Mm.
could just pull out of the Irish language, and because I was doing it faster than a lot of the others, it meant a lot of people copied what I was doing. So I had a good chunk of the people at the game casting spells in Irish, which I was very happy with. I didn't intend that, but
Well, or maybe it's a way to keep the language alive.
yeah,
All
absolutely.
right. What's something you wish you'd known about your work before you began?
Um, let's see. Um, that's a that's a difficult one. That
Mm,
storytelling sitting down is much harder. Um, I recently separated out my videos. I used to do a story and analysis together. I
mm,
now do them separately. And since I've started doing that and standing up to tell the stories, they're much easier to film. I usually only need one take instead of about 50. Um, it's just so much easier to do standing up, and I should have been doing that all along.
Do you feel that that's because like storytelling is something you kind of do with your whole body in a way?
I think it can be.
Mm,
I'm a very physical storyteller. I
mm,
think everyone has their own kind of style to it. Some people will be very still and very subtle in their movements, whereas I'm very big and expansive. And if I feel like I can't do that, it throws me off.
mm. No, that makes sense. So, how do you integrate your work into your daily life?
Well, it's my day job.
Well,
Yeah.
how do you preserve work life balance then? I guess is maybe a better question.
Well, preserving work-life balance. I have usually, unless I'm under a lot of time constraints, I will usually stop work around about 6 o'clock,
Hmm.
and that is a strict thing I have for myself. Um, and I make sure I have at least one day off a week, that kind of thing. Um, but also a lot of the things I do for pleasure are just happen to be involved.
Hmm.
Um, like I'm learning to play the harp and that kind of thing.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's good when you can do what you love, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say is your favorite aspect of storytelling and folklore?
with folklore specifically, you're never wrong. Every story has about 57 different versions of it depending on where you live. There's some stories where you'll have the same story, but it'll be about 6 or 7 different people, depending on what time period it's from or that kind of thing. Um, and actually just looking at that kind of thing and looking at the way stories travel,
Mm.
migratory legends and that kind of thing. Because are you familiar with the Wild Hunt?
Uh, yeah. It's got. I think it's in a lot of places, right? Because
Yeah,
they also have a wild hunt myth in Britain, in like in England itself as well. I think it's like the rider who comes out at night, and I forget exactly what his purpose is. Damn, I knew this too, like a while ago. I just love reading this stuff when I was younger.
it changes depending on where you are.
Mm,
It began in the Scandinavian countries. It was about
mm.
Odin leading his charge, and it was basically explaining the aurora borealis.
Oh yeah.
But there's a version in France that's about the riders of hell chasing down souls.
Mm,
There's a British version about, I think it's Herne the Hunter in Britain.
mm.
Here it would be Down, which is a video I'm actually working on at the moment. And that's a migratory legend. People bring it, and then in the new place, it takes on a new aspect and a new culture. I just think that's really interesting to look at and to follow and to trace.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating because you said, as you said, it comes from Scandinavia, and so in a way you can sort of you can picture it. Basically, it's a story that came probably with the Vikings as they traveled around that area, sort of attacking different areas and merging cultures and stuff like that.
Exactly. It's a really good way to trace like cultural connections as well.
Mm, that's true. Yeah. So, do you have a least favorite aspect? Anything that frustrates you?
Actually, it would be the exact same thing again. It can make research difficult
Mm,
um, because there are so many versions of different things. It can be difficult to separate one character from another sometimes, and it can sometimes be difficult to separate folklore from literature, which
mm.
is also annoying. Um,
Plus, a lot of it was oral, right? So, I mean, until it was
sorry, a
actually
lot of it.
a lot of it was was
Yes.
transmitted orally. So even when it was, I guess, recorded, eventually it went through changes.
Yeah, there's certain adaptation that oral traditions kind of have to go through when you write them down. And then it also depends on who's writing them down.
Mm,
Like most of the really old myths from Ireland, the ones from thousands of years ago, were written by were written down by medieval monks.
mm.
And they would have had a very specific slant they'd have put on it.
They had their own agenda. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, how do you cope with stress or obstacles in your work, in your pursuit of your work?
Um, well, sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually incorporate the stress into the video that I'm working on. There was one about I did about the Lanashee,
Hmm.
which is something people associate with Irish folklore, but was something that was actually completely invented by W.B. Yeats. And the video I did on that was basically me just going on a long rant about how much I hate him. um,
Yeah, this is sort of free form sort of adaptation that a lot of poets did. Yeah.
the rest of the time, I just complain with my coworkers at the museum. um,
Well, it's good. It's
we
good
all
to
have our
have people to sound off against. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we all have our specific axes to grind.
So, well, do you have any advice to people starting out in your field?
Oh, well, studying folklore in general, most of the time, the internet is not really your friend. Um,
I
there
believe.
are there are specific parts of the internet. If you can find a country's folklore archive, and if they've started digitizing it, that's a good place to go. Uh, I use ducas.ie, which is Ireland's folklore archive. It's not fully digitized yet, and some of it still needs to be translated, but it's a very good source. Finland has one as well, and that one is online too. Finland's is the biggest in the world. Ireland's is the second biggest,
Mm,
but outside of like dedicated academic archives, an awful lot of what you find on the internet isn't great.
mhm,
At, at least not for older folklore.
right.
For modern folklore, which would include things like conspiracy theories and cryptids and
Mm,
memes and all of that stuff. It's great. Um, I remember watching the Slender Man thing develop and just going, this is folklore happening right now, but way faster than it usually does.
that's true. Yeah, I guess sort of urban myths are like modern folklore. Yeah.
Exactly. We had a whole module on that.
Mhm,
But yeah, it's all folklore. If it's stuff being constructed through the people, through word of mouth, and it's not like something that's formally literal or
mhm,
literary rather,
mhm.
it's basically folklore.
Hmm, that's fun. That's interesting. Yeah. Because we don't really think about it, right? We think of folklore as being, these myths and legends of the past, but folklore is living, right?
Yeah,
It's constantly happening.
folklore in and of itself will never die.
Mhm.
In about 200 years, they'll be studying lolcat as a form of folklore and creepy pastas.
Maybe, yeah. So, how can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I have a website,
Mhm,
hogandice.com, that is in dire need of updating.
mhm.
My YouTube channel is Hog and Dice. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and Patreon. The same name everywhere. I'm very easy to find.
Well, that's good. That's good. It's always good to have sort of a brand that goes across all socials. And we'll have just links to all that in the description below. So check that out. And yeah, thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everybody for watching. This has been Everyday Expertise.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this interview. Be sure to share this video with friends and colleagues who may also enjoy this topic. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a comment below or check the description for our social media. See you next time.